Hello everyone, welcome to Salisbury Cathedral's daily reflection for this, the first day of the month of March. I'm Robert Titley, the Cathedral's Canon Treasurer, and it's good to be with you again. When I was last doing one of these reflections, I said that one of my tasks that I'd set myself during these days of lockdown was to try and catch up on watching films or re-watching some films I'd particularly appreciated in the past. And I have to report some reasonably good progress on that. I'm doing much better on watching films than keeping my daily exercise up. Indeed, it may be that the two things are connected. I did re-watch the film Amadeus, which was the particular film I was talking about in that last reflection, the film about Mozart, and it was as good as I remembered it. And of course it has a rather fine soundtrack, as you would hope, given the subject matter of the film. Since then, I've had some other great moments or some reacquaintances of which I've been very glad to make with films. I watched for the first time In Bruges, two Irish hitmen killing time in the medieval duel of Belgium. A violent film, very strong language that also manages to be funny and has real seriousness to it. It is a kind of meditation on the terrors of judgment that is not tempered by love. I watched Citizen Kane, an all-time classic and apparently Donald Trump's favourite film, and this weekend I watched Rush, the film about the rivalry between two Formula One drivers, James Hunt and Niki Lauda, in the 1970s. I liked the film, and I don't really enjoy motor racing, which is therefore a real plaudit for the film. But last week I was put in mind of a film I last saw in full over 20 years ago. And that was because of the sermon I was getting ready to preach in the cathedral yesterday. As is the way when you're preparing a sermon or a lecture or a talk, you sometimes find that you've got more material than you can put in. And that was the case here. In particular, I had a theme I didn't explore very much that comes out of a particular exchange between Jesus and his disciple Peter at a particular moment in Mark's Gospel. Jesus is telling his disciples how what's going to happen to him, how he's going to be rejected and how he's going to suffer and how he's going to die. And this appalls Peter, who sort of tells Jesus off for even thinking such things. And that draws from Jesus one of his most stinging phrases as he says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." Now, what does he mean? Does he mean that Peter is literally the devil incarnate? Or is he just using a figure of speech, a little bit the way we do when we say the devil is in the detail? Well, neither of those things quite seem to fit what Jesus might be saying there. So what is his meaning? And that got me into some deep stuff about where evil comes from in our world. And they're questions each of us has to ask ourselves at one point in life or another. Do you believe in Satan, in a personal devil? What's your interim report about explaining the presence of evil in our world? Whether it's a human enemy or the pitiless processes of nature, where does this bad stuff come from? And it was that put me in mind of The Thin Red Line, a 1998 film directed by Terence Malick, set in Guadalcanal in 1942 during the war in the Pacific. The film was overshadowed by Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan, which came out the same year and mopped up many more awards. But for my money, The Thin Red Line is the better film of the two. I think in the end it's just more grown up. It's less keen to tie up all the loose ends. It also has a great soundtrack, by the way, Hans Zimmer, and some haunting singing of hymns in pidgin by a church choir from the Solomon Islands. In The Thin Red Line, we spend over 2 hours in the company of a group of men who are, moment by moment at times, living on the edge of pain and death. And that prompts in them some deep questions. The one I was working with about evil is very eloquently put by Private Edward Train, who is from somewhere in the southern states of the US. This great evil, he asks, where's it come from? How did it steal into the world? What seed, what root did it grow from? Who's doing this? Who's killing us, robbing us of life and light, mocking us with the sight of what we might have known? Does our ruin benefit the earth? Does it help the grass to grow, the sun to shine? Train is sure that this is a human problem. He speaks to himself at another point. We were a family. How did it break up and come apart? So that now we're turned against each other, each standing in the other's light. How'd we lose the good that was given us? Let it slip away, scattered it, careless. What's keeping us from reaching out, touching the glory? But he sees that aside from the human violence, nature is at it too. Again, he thinks aloud at one point in the film, what's this war in the heart of nature? Why does nature vie with itself? The land contend with the sea? Is there an avenging power in nature? Not one power, but two. Here then, he's thinking about God and the devil and how that might possibly work out. A Thin Red Line is, in the end, however, a profoundly hopeful film. At least I found it so. Another character in the film is Private Whit, who is a real headache to the commander of the non-commissioned officer in his platoon, Top Sergeant Welsh, played by Sean Penn. Whit is a headache to his sergeant, but he's also a mystic as well. And there's one exchange between Whit and Welsh that sums up the mystery of faith that we all wrestle with. How some of us see the world, despite everything, as the arena of God's loving presence, and some of us don't or can't. And how some of us move by experience from one group to the other. In this world, says Welsh, a man himself is nothing, and there ain't no world but this one. You're wrong there, says Whit. I've seen another world. Sometimes I think it was just my imagination. Well, says Welsh, then you've seen things I never will. The mystery isn't solved in the film. As I've said, this is not a film that ties up the loose ends, and I think that's what makes it a great piece of cinema. And for the question of evil, it presents to us another question just as deep, put by another man in the platoon, Private Bell. Love, where does it come from? Who lit this flame in us? Those are some questions you and I might consciously live with in the coming days as we move through this season of reflection that we call Lent. Thank you for spending these few minutes with me, and may God, who has lit the fire of love in each of our hearts, be with you. Goodbye.